My late wife's purse was the only thing I had left of her. When I couldn't find it, my son shouted, "I sold it." I needed money for my cruise. I called the pawn shop, hoping to buy the purse back, but the man on the line sounded terrified. "Sir, there was a false bottom in that purse. What we found inside left me completely frozen." Before I continue this story and tell you about the secret that destroyed my ungrateful son, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. My name is Thomas Bennett. At 70 years old, I thought I had designed a life structure that could withstand any earthquake. I was a structural engineer for 40 years. I built skyscrapers in Chicago that could sway in the wind without breaking. But I never calculated the damage that could be caused by my own flesh and blood. I was standing in the hallway of my Florida home, my hands shaking so violently that I had to lean against the wall for support. The sound of shattering glass still echoed in my ears. It was the sound of my heart breaking. 10 seconds earlier, I had walked into the master bedroom, the room I hadn't slept in since Catherine passed away 3 years ago. I kept it exactly as she left it. Her perfume bottles were still on the vanity. Her reading glasses were still on the nightstand. And in the glass display case in the corner sat her vintage Hermes crocodile purse. It was the first extravagant gift I ever bought her, back in 1985, when my first major firm took off. That bag was not just leather and stitching. It was our history. It was the keeper of her secrets. But now, the glass of the display case was jagged and broken on the floor. The velvet cushion was empty. The dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun illuminated a crime scene. A cold dread washed over me, a sensation I had not felt since the doctor told me Catherine was gone. This wasn't a burglary. The alarm hadn't gone off. The front door wasn't forced open. The thief had a key. The thief had my last name. I moved as fast as my arthritic knees would allow, scrambling down the mahogany staircase. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. From the foyer, I heard the distinctive zip of a suitcase and the click of heels on the marble floor. Bradley, my only son. 35 years old, and still waiting for the world to hand him a living he never earned. I reached the bottom landing just as he was snapping the handle of a suitcase. It was covered in the Louis Vuitton monogram. A fake. I knew it was fake because I refused to buy him the real one last Christmas. He stood there, wearing a linen suit that was too tight, checking his reflection in the hallway mirror. Next to him stood Tiffany, my daughter-in-law. She was scrolling through her phone, tapping her long acrylic nails against the screen, completely indifferent to the destruction upstairs. "Bradley," I choked out, my voice raspy with panic. "Where is it?" He didn't even turn around. He just adjusted his sunglasses, even though we were inside the house. "Relax, Dad. You're going to give yourself a stroke." "Where is what?" "The purse," I shouted, pointing a trembling finger toward the ceiling. "Your mother's crocodile purse. The glass is shattered, Bradley. It is gone." He finally turned to look at me, a smirk playing on his lips. "Oh, that. I did you a favor, old man. I was decluttering. That thing was gathering dust. It smelled like mothballs and sadness. You need to move on." "You did what?" I asked, my breath catching in my throat. I took a step toward him, my hands balling into fists at my sides. "I sold it," Bradley said casually, as if he were talking about an old newspaper. "I swung by that pawn shop on 2nd Avenue on my way to get Tiffany. Got a good deal, too." A good deal. My vision blurred. That bag was a vintage Hermes Birkin. In today's market, it was worth upwards of $40,000. But to me, it was priceless. "How much?" I whispered, fearing the answer. $400, Bradley beamed, looking proud of himself. Can you believe it? Instant cash. $400. The idiocy was almost as painful as the theft. He had traded a fortune for pocket change. He was so blinded by his need for quick gratification that he didn't even know what he was holding. He had held a masterpiece in his hands and treated it like a grocery bag. "You idiot!" I roared, stepping into his personal space. "That bag was worth more than your car. You stole from me. You stole from your mother's memory. Go get it back, right now!" Tiffany stepped between us, the smell of her overpowering synthetic perfume filling the air. She rolled her eyes, a gesture she had perfected over the 5 years she had been draining my bank account. "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Thomas," she snapped. "It is just an old, ugly bag. Besides, we needed the cash. Do you know how much the mandatory gratuities are on a Royal Caribbean cruise? We couldn't show up empty-handed. We need to tip the bartenders if we want good service." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "You sold my dead wife's heirloom to tip a bartender on a cruise ship." "We deserve this vacation, Dad," Bradley chimed in, checking his watch. "Being a freelancer is stressful. And you know, you've been really tight with the money lately. Since you cut off my allowance, we had to get creative. Consider it an early inheritance." Creative. He called theft creative. I looked at the suitcase by his feet. The fake designer logo seemed to mock me. Everything about them was fake. Their lifestyle, their affection, their apologies. "I am not letting you leave," I said, reaching for the handle of his suitcase. "You are going to that pawn shop, and you are getting it back." I grabbed the handle of his luggage. I didn't have the strength to fight him, but I had the desperation of a man losing his last connection to the love of his life. "Let go, old man," Bradley growled, his voice losing its playful edge. "No," I gritted out, pulling back. Then, I felt a sharp, sudden force against my chest. It wasn't Bradley. It was Tiffany. She had shoved me with both hands, putting her entire body weight into it. I stumbled backward. My heel caught on the edge of the hallway rug. I flailed my arms, trying to find balance, but there was nothing to grab. I hit the floor hard. A sharp pain shot up my hip, radiating down to my toes. I gasped. The wind knocked out of me. I lay there on the cold marble, looking up at them. Most children would rush to help their 70-year-old father if he fell. Most human beings would show a flicker of concern. Bradley and Tiffany just looked annoyed. "Look what you made her do," Bradley said, shaking his head. "You really are losing it, Dad. You're unstable. Maybe when we get back we should look into that assisted living facility Tiffany found. You're clearly a danger to yourself." Tiffany smoothed down her dress, looking at me with pure disgust. "We are going to be late for our flight because of his tantrum. Come on, Brad. The Uber is outside." Bradley grabbed his suitcase. He stepped over my legs. He literally stepped over his fallen father to get to the door. "Bye, Dad," he called out, not looking back. "Try not to break anything else while we are gone. And don't wait up. We'll be sipping Mai Tais in the Bahamas." The heavy oak door slammed shut with a finality that shook the frames on the wall. The lock clicked. Then silence. I lay there for a long time. The pain in my hip was throbbing, a hot, rhythmic pulse, but it was nothing compared to the cold realization settling in my chest. They didn't just steal a purse. They didn't just push me down. They had discarded me. To them, I was just an obstacle between them and my money. I was a wallet that had stopped opening, a nuisance that needed to be managed. I dragged myself up, using the console table for leverage. My reflection in the mirror was pale, gray, and old. I looked like the victim they wanted me to be. But as I stood there, straightening my spine, waiting for the pain to subside, something shifted. They thought I was weak. They thought I was a clueless old man who would cry over a bag and then welcome them home with open arms. They thought the purse was empty. They were wrong. I limped to the window and watched the black SUV pull away from the curb. They were heading to the airport, laughing, thinking they had won. They had $400 in their pockets and a week of luxury ahead of them. I turned away from the window and looked at the phone on the hallway table. I had to find that bag. Not just for sentiment, but because Catherine had told me, on her deathbed, that she had left something for me. Something for a rainy day. I never looked for it because I never thought it would rain this hard. I picked up the phone book, my hands still shaking, but this time not from fear. I was shaking from adrenaline. I flipped to the yellow pages, looking for pawn shops in the downtown district. I would call every single one of them until I found it. I dialed the first number. No answer. I dialed the second. Wrong number. I dialed the third. A gruff voice answered. "Yeah, Sal's Pawn and Loan." I took a deep breath. "My name is Thomas Bennett. My son came in earlier today. He sold a crocodile skin purse." There was a pause on the other end. A long, heavy silence. "Yeah, the kid with the fake suit," the man said. "I remember him. Real piece of work." "I need to buy it back," I said, my voice breaking. "I will pay double. I will pay triple. Please tell me you still have it." I heard the man, Sal, sigh on the other end of the line. "You're lucky, Mr. Bennett. I was just about to box it up. Some collector in New York bought it online 10 minutes ago, ma." My heart stopped. "Please," I begged, "do not ship it. I am coming down there right now. I will give you $1,000 cash. Just hold it." There was another pause, then the sound of something being moved on a counter. Then Sal's voice changed. It dropped an octave. It sounded urgent, terrified. "Mr. Bennett," Sal said, "I think you better get down here, now, and bring your ID." "Why?" I asked, gripping the phone tighter. "Because," Sal whispered, "I was checking the lining to make sure it was clean before I shipped it. There was a tear in the bottom. Or I thought it was a tear. It was a false bottom, sir. And what I found inside," he trailed off. "What?" I demanded. "What is inside?" "You just get down here," Sal said, "and be careful, if anyone else knows about this." The line went dead. I stood there in the empty hallway of my quiet house. The pain in my hip was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. My son had sold his mother's legacy for $400, but he had left behind something far more valuable. And whatever it was going to be the weapon I needed. I grabbed my keys. I didn't know it yet, but the war had just begun. I watched the red taillights of the Uber fade into the distance, blurring slightly as the heat shimmer rose from the asphalt. The silence that followed was heavy, pressing against my eardrums like the pressure of deep water. I was standing in the driveway of the home I had paid for, wearing house slippers and a shirt stained with the coffee I had spilled when I fell. For a moment, I felt a wave of exhaustion so profound I thought my legs might give out again. It would be so easy to just go back inside, take a painkiller for my hip, and sleep. It would be so easy to let them win. But then I looked at my hands. These were the hands that had drafted the blueprints for the Hancock Center renovation. These were hands that had held Catherine's hand while she took her last breath. And in that quiet moment, her voice came back to me, clear as a bell ringing in the humid Florida air. It was 3 weeks before she passed. The cancer had reduced my vibrant, strong wife to a shadow on the bedsheets. She had grabbed my wrist with surprising strength, her eyes locked onto mine. "Thomas," she had whispered, "if anything ever happens, if things get hard with the boy, you go to the crocodile purse. It is your insurance policy." At the time, I had nodded just to soothe her, thinking the morphine was making her confused. I thought she meant I should sell it if I needed money for bills. I had dismissed it as the ramblings of a dying woman, worried about her husband's solvency. God, I was a fool. Catherine was never confused. Even at the end, she saw things I refused to see. She saw the greed growing in Bradley's eyes long before I did. She knew that one day I would be standing in this driveway, stripped of my dignity, needing a lifeline. That memory straightened my spine. I was not going back to bed. I turned around and walked into the garage, bypassing the empty space where Bradley's sports car usually sat. I walked straight to my old Ford F-150. It was 15 years old, dented on the rear bumper, and smelled of oil and old leather. Bradley hated it. He called it a junk heap and refused to ride in it. To me, it was the only honest machine in this entire zip code. I climbed in, wincing as my hip protested the movement. The engine roared to life with a cough and a sputter, a sound of defiance. I didn't know exactly where he had gone, but Bradley was lazy. He wouldn't drive to the high-end consignment shops in Coral Gables where they asked too many questions about provenance and receipts. He wanted quick cash with no paper trail. That meant he went to Overtown or Little Haiti. He went to the places where desperate people sold their souls for pennies on the dollar. I backed out of the driveway, the tires crunching over the gravel. I drove with a singular focus, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. As I left the manicured lawns of my neighborhood and crossed onto the highway, the scenery began to change. The palm trees were no longer trimmed. The storefronts had bars on the windows. The smooth pavement turned into potholed streets lined with trash and abandoned shopping carts. This was Overtown. It was a place of survival, not luxury. I parked the truck in front of a shop with a peeling yellow sign that simply said "Cash for Gold." I locked the doors manually, a habit from a different era. People on the sidewalk watched me. I stood out like a sore thumb. A 70-year-old white man in a linen shirt, looking lost and frantic. I pushed open the heavy glass door of the first shop. The air conditioning was broken, and the air smelled of stale cigarettes and sweat. The man behind the counter, a heavy-set guy with tattoos climbing up his neck, didn't even look up from his phone. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I am looking for a purse. A crocodile skin Hermes. My son sold it here maybe an hour ago." The man looked up then. He looked me up and down, his eyes landing on my gold wedding band. "We don't have it," he said flatly. "Now buy something or get out." "Please," I said, stepping closer to the plexiglass barrier. "It is very important. I will pay you for the information." He laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Look, Pops, you look like you wandered out of a nursing home. Does your nurse know you are out here? Go home before someone steals your shoes." The insult stung, but I swallowed it. I didn't have time for pride. I turned and walked out, the sound of his laughter following me. The second shop was worse. It was a dimly lit room filled with musical instruments and power tools. When I asked about the purse, the owner, a wiry man with nervous eyes, accused me of being a cop. He chased me out, shouting that he ran a legitimate business and didn't want any trouble with the law. By the time I reached the fourth shop, the sun was beginning to dip lower, casting long, menacing shadows across the street. My shirt was sticking to my back with sweat. My hip was throbbing with a dull, rhythmic ache. Doubt began to creep in. Maybe Bradley had lied. Maybe he had thrown it in a dumpster. Maybe he had sold it to a friend. I was chasing a ghost in a city that didn't care if I lived or died. I was walking back to my truck, head down, feeling the weight of my 70 years pressing down on my shoulders, when a group of young men sitting on a stoop called out. "Hey, Grandpa," one of them shouted. "You looking for drugs or looking to get robbed?" I ignored them, keeping my eyes on the pavement. I was terrified, but I couldn't show it. Catherine always said I was stubborn as a mule. I hoped that stubbornness would be enough to get me through this. Then I saw it. Tucked away between a liquor store and a boarded-up laundromat was a small shop with a clean window. The sign above the door was hand-painted but neat. Sal's Pawn and Loan. It was the shop Sal had mentioned on the phone earlier, the one Bradley had mentioned. I had driven past it twice without realizing. I felt a surge of adrenaline that temporarily masked the pain in my leg. I pushed the door open. A bell chimed, a cheerful sound that felt out of place in this neighborhood. The inside was organized. Guitars hung in straight lines. Jewelry cases were polished. Behind the counter stood an older man, maybe my age, wearing a faded military cap. "It is a rare item. It sold in 5 minutes." "No," I whispered, gripping the edge of the counter. "No, you can't." "It is done," Sal said, shaking his head. "The payment cleared. I already printed the shipping label. The courier is on his way to pick it up. It is boxed in the back." I felt the room spin. I had come so close. I had braved the heat, the insults, and the fear, only to be told I was too late. "You don't understand," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "It is not just a purse. It is my wife's. It is all I have left." Sal looked at me with sympathy, but he didn't move. "I can't break a contract, Mr. Bennett. My reputation is all I have." I stared at him, desperation clawing at my chest. I had to think. I had to find a way. And then I remembered the Rolex on my wrist. It was the watch the firm gave me when I got tired. Solid gold, worth easily $10,000. I fumbled with the clasp, my fingers shaking. I tore it off my wrist and slammed it onto the glass counter. "Take it," I said. "It is worth 10 times what you sold that bag for. Give me the bag, and you keep the watch, and I will pay you whatever the buyer paid." Sal looked at the watch, then at me. He saw the desperation in my eyes. He saw a man who had nothing left to lose. He sighed, a long, heavy sound. He looked at the clock on the wall. "The courier is due in 10 minutes, he muttered. He looked back at me. "You really want that old bag that bad?" "More than my life," I said. Sal stared at me for another long moment. Then he reached under the counter and pulled out a box cutter. "The box is in the back," he said. "Come with me. But if the buyer sues me, I am giving them your name." I didn't care about lawsuits. I didn't care about the watch. I followed him into the back room, a cramped space filled with cardboard boxes and the smell of dust. There it was, sitting on a packing table, wrapped in brown paper. Sal picked up the box. He hesitated. "You know," he said, looking at the package, "when I was packing it, I noticed something. The lining inside. It felt uneven." I froze. "Uneven." "I thought about checking it," Sal continued, "but I figured it was just old leather warping. But seeing you here, seeing you give up a Rolex for a $400 sale, it makes me wonder." He handed me the box. "Open it," he said. I took the box. My hands were trembling so bad I could barely hold the box cutter Sal handed me. I sliced through the tape. I pulled away the bubble wrap. And there it was, the dark, glossy crocodile skin, the gold hardware tarnished with age. It looked exactly as it did the day I gave it to Catherine. I reached inside. The leather was cool to the touch. I ran my fingers along the bottom. And then I felt it. A ridge. A seam that shouldn't be there. Sal was watching me intently. "There is something in there, isn't there?" he whispered. I nodded, unable to speak. I found the loose stitch Catherine must have made years ago. I pulled. The false bottom gave way. And what fell out onto the dusty table of that pawn shop was not just a secret. It was a revelation that would change everything. A small black notebook and a silver USB drive. I looked at Sal. His face had gone pale. "Mr. Bennett," he said, his voice barely audible, "I think you better lock the door." I stood there in the back room of the pawn shop, the fluorescent light humming above us like a dying insect. Sal had the box in his hands. He had just shown me the possibility of a secret inside that purse, but now he was pulling it back toward his chest. The moment of shared curiosity was over, replaced by the cold, hard reality of commerce. "I am sorry, Mr. Bennett," Sal said, his voice dropping back to that rigid professional tone. "I should not have shown you that. I got carried away. But the fact remains that this item is sold. The buyer in New York already paid. The shipping label is printed. If I don't ship this, my rating takes a hit. In this business, your word is the only currency that matters." He started to close the flaps of the cardboard box. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. I could not let that box leave this room. I could not let a stranger in New York open my wife's purse and find whatever she had hidden for me. "Sal, please," I said, my voice trembling. I stepped forward, my hands gripping the edge of the packing table. "You do not understand. That is not just merchandise. That is my life. I will pay you double what the buyer paid. I will give you $1,000 cash right now." Sal shook his head, his jaw set in a stubborn line. He was a veteran. I could tell by the way he stood, the way he looked me in the eye without blinking. He was a man of rules. "It is not about the money," he said firmly. "It is about the principle. I made a deal. I honor the deal. That is how I sleep at night. Your son sold it to me legal and fair. I sold it to the collector legal and fair. The chain of custody is closed." I looked at his face. I saw the stone wall of his integrity. Money would not move him. Pity would not move him. I needed to offer him something that transcended a simple transaction. I needed to offer a sacrifice. I looked down at my left wrist. The gold Rolex Submariner caught the light. It was the heavy, solid weight of 40 years of labor. My partners had given it to me at my retirement party. On the back, it was engraved with the words, "Building the Future." It was the only thing of value I had left that Bradley had not been able to touch, mostly because I never took it off. I unclasped the band. The click of the metal echoed in the small room. I slid the watch off my wrist. The skin underneath was pale, a stark contrast to my tanned arm. "Take this," I said. I placed the watch on the dirty table between us. It sat there, gleaming against the scarred wood. Sal looked down at it. His eyes widened slightly. He knew watches. He knew exactly what he was looking at. "Mr. Bennett," Sal said, looking up at me, "that is a Submariner. That is a $12,000 watch. The buyer online only paid $800 for the purse." I pushed the watch toward him. "I do not care," I said, maintaining eye contact. "I am not asking to buy the purse. I am asking to make a trade. My past for her past. You take the watch. You cancel the sale. You tell the buyer it was damaged in processing. You keep your rating, you make a $10,000 profit, and I get my wife back." Sal looked at the watch, then at the box, then at me. He saw the desperation in my stance. He saw that I was not a man making a business decision. I was a man fighting for his soul. For a long minute, the only sound was the humming light and the distant wail of a siren outside. Then Sal reached out. He didn't pick up the watch immediately. He placed his hand on the cardboard box and slid it across the table toward me. "Done," he said softly. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My knees felt weak. I reached out and grabbed the box, clutching it to my chest like a life preserver. Sal picked up the watch. He turned it over, reading the inscription. He shook his head, a small, cynical smile playing on his lips. "You know," he said, looking up at me, "your son, he walked in here like he owned the city, strutting around in that cheap suit, acting like he was doing me a favor by selling me this old thing." I didn't want to talk about Bradley, but I couldn't look away. "He stood right where you are standing," Sal continued, his voice laced with disgust. "He haggled with me over $20. He was desperate for $400. The kid is a moron." He handed over a genuine vintage Hermes Birkin Porosus crocodile. "In that condition, with the original hardware, that bag is worth $40,000 at auction." I closed my eyes. $40,000. Bradley had sold a fortune for the price of a cheap dinner. "He is the stupidest man I have ever met," Sal said, slipping the watch into his pocket. "And he doesn't deserve a father who would give up a Rolex to clean up his mess." I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Sal was right. I nodded to him, a silent acknowledgement of the transaction and the truth. I turned and walked out of the shop, the box tucked tight under my arm. The drive home was a blur. The adrenaline that had fueled me was fading, replaced by a deep, aching exhaustion. My hip throbbed with every bump in the road. Night had fallen completely by the time I pulled into my driveway. The house was dark. Usually I would leave the porch light on, but Bradley must have turned it off to save electricity before he left. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the silence. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of abandonment. The air was stale. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't want to see the empty spaces where my family should have been. I didn't want to see the shattered glass of the display case that was still on the bedroom floor. I walked into the living room and sat down in my leather armchair. It was the chair I used to sit in while Catherine read on the sofa. I placed the box on my lap. My hands were shaking again. I carefully peeled back the tape Sal had applied. I opened the flaps. I reached in and pulled out the purse. It smelled like cedar and old leather, but underneath that, faintly, I could smell her perfume. Shalimar. It was a scent that instantly transported me back 30 years. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and fast. I sat there in the dark for a long time, just holding the bag. I ran my fingers over the textured scales of the crocodile skin. It was cold and bumpy under my fingertips. I traced the gold clasp. Then, I remembered the false bottom. Sal had said he felt something. A ridge. A seam. I slipped my hand inside the bag. The silk lining was smooth. I felt around the edges, my fingers probing like a surgeon. At first I felt nothing. Then, near the bottom corner, I felt it. A slight inconsistency in the stitching, a part of the lining that was stiffer than the rest. I pressed down on it. There was a sound. It was a faint, crinkling sound, like dry paper being compressed. And beneath the paper, something hard and small. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. This wasn't just a structural flaw in the bag. Catherine had hidden something here. Something she didn't want Bradley to find. Something she didn't even tell me about until her final moments. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. I needed a knife. I needed to cut open the lining of this $40,000 bag to find out what my wife had been protecting. But before I could stand up, I felt the object shift under my fingers. It felt like a small book, and next to it, the cold, unmistakable outline of a metal drive. I sat there in the darkness, my hand deep inside the purse, paralyzed by a sudden, terrifying realization. Catherine was the most organized woman I knew. She didn't hide things unless she was afraid. Who was she afraid of? The answer was currently drinking a cocktail on a cruise ship, laughing about how easily he had fooled his old man. I gripped the lining. I was about to rip it open. I was about to uncover a truth that would turn my grief into a weapon. I held the small paring knife in my trembling hand. The blade caught the dim light from the street lamp outside, a sliver of silver in the gloom of my living room. It felt wrong to cut into this bag. It felt like I was desecrating a shrine. This purse had been on Catherine's arm at gala dinners, at our son's graduation, and at the hospital on the day she received her diagnosis. It was part of her, but the ridge beneath the silk lining was undeniable, and the silence of the house was demanding answers. I took a breath that rattled in my chest and pressed the tip of the knife into the champagne-colored silk. The fabric gave way with a heartbreaking tearing sound. I sliced carefully along the bottom seam, trying to minimize the damage, but my hands were not as steady as they used to be. The lining pulled apart, revealing the raw leather underneath and a thin layer of cardboard stiffener. And there, nestled in the space between the leather and the cardboard, were two objects. I reached in and pulled them out. The first was a small black notebook. It was a moleskin, the kind Catherine used to carry everywhere to jot down grocery lists or ideas for her garden. The leather cover was worn soft. The second object was heavier. It was a metallic USB drive, cold and sleek. Engraved on the side of the metal casing was a tiny anchor. I set the USB drive on the arm of the chair and opened the notebook. My heart hammered against my ribs as I saw the date written at the top of the first page. It was dated 3 years ago, 2 weeks before she died. The handwriting was unmistakable, elegant, looping, and firm. Even as her body was failing her, Catherine's hand had remained strong. It was like hearing her voice whisper in my ear, filling the empty room with her presence. I adjusted my glasses, squinting in the low light, and began to read. "My dearest Thomas," she wrote, "if you are reading this, it means 2 things. First, that I am gone, and second, that our son has finally pushed you too far. I hid this deep because I prayed you would never have to find it. I wanted to believe that Bradley would grow up. I wanted to believe that once I was gone, he would step up and be the man we raised him to be. But a mother knows, Thomas. A mother always knows." I paused, wiping a tear that had escaped and rolled down my cheek. She knew. She had seen the rot in him long before I was willing to admit it. I forced myself to continue reading. "You think Bradley is just lazy, Thomas. You think he is just a dreamer who has not found his path yet. But you are wrong. He is not just lost. He is dangerous. You need to know the truth about what happened in 2018. I racked my brain. That was the year Bradley had moved back in with us briefly, claiming he was between apartments. It was a quiet year, or so I thought. Catherine's words continued, each one a hammer blow to my chest. "Do you remember when we got that strange letter from the IRS about an unreported investment account? You thought it was a clerical error. You let me handle it because you were busy with the chaotic renovation of the Skyline Tower. I never told you the truth because you were under so much stress, and I didn't want to break your heart. But it wasn't an error." I leaned closer to the page, my breath hitching. "Bradley stole your identity, Thomas. He didn't just borrow money. He used your social security number. He opened 5 credit cards in your name. He took out a small business loan for a venture that didn't exist. He racked up over $50,000 in debt in 3 months. I found out when the collection calls started coming to my cell phone instead of the house line. I paid them off, Thomas. I used the last of my inheritance from my mother, to clear the debts and scrub your credit report. I threatened him. I told him if he ever did it again, I would turn him in myself. He cried. He begged. He promised he would change. I lowered the book, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped it. $50,000. He had stolen my identity while sleeping under my roof. He had eaten my food, smiled at me across the dinner table, and all the while he was systematically destroying my financial reputation. And Catherine, my sweet, protective Catherine, had absorbed the blow in silence. She had cleaned up his mess to protect me from the pain of knowing my own son was a criminal. But the entry didn't stop there. "I know he hasn't changed," she wrote. "I see the way he looks at our things. I see the way Tiffany whispers in his ear. They are waiting, Thomas. They are waiting for us to die so they can pick the meat off our bones. That is why I am leaving you this key." I looked at the USB drive sitting on the armrest. It looked so innocuous, just a piece of metal. But Catherine's next words made me realize it was a bomb. "In 2015, when you were laughing at that article in the newspaper about magic internet money, I made an investment. I took the bonus money from your Dubai project, the part you told me to spend on something for myself. I didn't buy jewelry. I didn't buy a car. I bought Bitcoin." I stared at the word. Bitcoin. In 2015, I vaguely remembered her talking about digital currency, about the future of finance. I had dismissed it as a fad, something for computer nerds and gamblers. "I bought 150 coins," the letter read. "At the time they were cheap. I put the access codes on this encrypted drive. The password is the date we met, followed by the name of our first dog. You know the one." I did the math in my head, and my stomach flipped. 150 bitcoins. I didn't know the exact exchange rate today, but I knew it was astronomical. It was in the tens of thousands per coin. "This is your freedom fund, Thomas," Catherine wrote. "This is your armor. If Bradley tries to take the house, if he tries to declare you incompetent, if he tries to leave you with nothing, you use this. This money does not exist on any ledger he can find. The IRS knows about it because I paid the capital gains taxes in advance under my maiden name trust. But Bradley does not know. He thinks I spent that money on charity." I looked at the USB drive again with new eyes. It wasn't just money. It was a weapon. It was a shield. The letter ended with a final, searing paragraph. "Do not let him win, Thomas. You are the strongest man I know. You built skyscrapers that scrape the clouds. Do not let our son tear you down to the foundation. If he treats you with love, share this with him. But if he treats you the way I fear he will, then you take this money and you go to Italy. You go to that villa in Tuscany we always talked about. You live, Thomas. You live for both of us." I closed the notebook. The silence in the room was no longer oppressive. It was charged with electric energy. I was not a feeble old man sitting in the dark anymore. I was a man who had just been handed a loaded gun by his guardian angel. I stood up, disregarding the pain in my hip. I walked over to my desk and booted up my computer. The screen glowed blue, illuminating my face. I plugged in the USB drive. A password prompt appeared. I typed it in. October 12th, 1975. Buster. The screen flashed. A folder opened. Inside was a digital wallet file and a text document. I opened the wallet viewer. The numbers refreshed, syncing with the blockchain. 150 Bitcoin. I quickly opened a browser tab and checked the current price. $65,000 per coin. I sat back in my chair, the breath leaving my lungs in a rush. I pulled out my calculator, though I didn't really need it to know the magnitude of what I was looking at. $9.7 million. My wife had left me nearly $10 million, and my son had sold the key to this fortune for $400 to pay for a cruise tip. A laugh bubbled up in my chest. It started as a low chuckle and grew into a loud, barking laugh that bounced off the walls. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the laugh of a man who sees the cosmic irony of the universe. Bradley and Tiffany were out there right now, likely sipping cheap champagne, thinking they had squeezed the last drop of value out of me. They thought they had left me with nothing but a broken heart and an empty bank account. They had no idea. But then, the laughter died in my throat as I remembered the other part of Catherine's letter. The part about the identity theft. If he had done it in 2018, and if he was desperate enough to sell his mother's purse today, what else was he doing right now? He had my social security number. He had access to the mail. He knew where I kept my files. A cold chill went down my spine. I minimized the Bitcoin wallet and opened a new tab. I typed in the address for the credit bureau. I needed to see my credit report. I needed to see the damage. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I answered the security questions. What was the make of your first car? Ford. What is your mother's maiden name? Sullivan. The report loaded. A spinning wheel on the screen mocked my anxiety. And then, the page populated. I stared at the screen, and the blood drained from my face. There were 5 active credit cards I didn't recognize. There was a second mortgage on the house I had paid off 10 years ago. There was a business loan taken out 3 months ago in my name. The total debt was staggering. $300,000. And there was a notification in red text at the top of the screen. Notice of default. Foreclosure proceedings initiated on primary residence. I wasn't just robbed. I was being evicted. My son hadn't just taken a vacation. He had signed my death warrant. He had leveraged everything I owned, everything I had built, to fund his delusions of grandeur. And he had left me here to face the consequences alone while he sailed away. I looked at the USB drive glowing softly in the port. Then I looked at the foreclosure notice. Catherine told me to go to Italy. But I couldn't go to Italy yet, not while there was a rat in the house. I reached for the phone. I wasn't calling Bradley. I was done talking to him. I was calling the one person who could help me burn his world to the ground, legally. I was calling my lawyer, Henderson. It was 2 a.m, but I didn't care. The war had officially started, and unlike my son, I was fully funded. I sat in the glow of the computer monitor, the blue light casting long, harsh shadows across the room that had once been my sanctuary. My finger hovered over the mouse, trembling slightly, not from age but from the sheer magnitude of what I was looking at. The digital wallet interface was stark, minimalist, and utterly terrifying in its implications. 150 Bitcoin. I opened a separate browser window and typed in the current exchange rate, my heart hammering a rhythm against my ribs that felt dangerous. The number that populated the screen made my breath catch in my throat. It was not just a lot of money. It was generational wealth. It was an empire. $10,200,000. I leaned back in my leather chair, the leather creaking in the silent house. I looked around at the dusty bookshelves, the faded rug, the peeling paint in the corner of the ceiling I had been meaning to fix. For the last 3 years, I had been living like a pauper, clipping coupons and sweating over the electric bill, worried that my pension wouldn't stretch far enough to cover the rising property taxes. I had let Bradley make me feel small. I had let him make me feel like a burden. And all this time, Catherine had left me the keys to the kingdom. I looked back at the screen, at the list of transactions. There was only one entry, 2015, a single purchase. I remembered that year. I remembered Catherine smiling at me over breakfast, telling me she had handled the bonus check. She hadn't spent it on clothes or a vacation. She had bet on the future. She had bet on me. But as I stared at the fortune, the warmth of her love was quickly replaced by the cold, creeping chill of the second part of her warning. The notebook lay open on the desk, the pages fluttering slightly under the air conditioning vent. Her handwriting screamed at me. "Check your credit, Thomas." I didn't want to do it. Part of me wanted to close the laptop, take the USB drive, and just leave. I wanted to drive to the airport and never look back. But I was an engineer. I dealt in facts, in structural integrity, in finding the cracks before the building collapsed, and my life was collapsing. I opened a new tab and navigated to the credit bureau's website. I typed in my social security number, the digits I had memorized since I was 16. I answered the security questions mechanically. Which of the following addresses have you lived at? Which of the following auto loans is yours? The processing wheel spun for what felt like an eternity. Then, the report loaded. If the Bitcoin wallet was a vision of heaven, this was a map of hell. I scrolled down, my eyes widening with each line item. The credit score at the top was a disaster. 520. A number that screamed high risk. But it was the details that made my stomach churn with nausea. There were credit cards I had never seen. An American Express Platinum opened 2 years ago. Balance maxed out at $50,000. A Chase Sapphire Reserve, maxed out. A Discover card, maxed out. I clicked on the transaction history for the Amex. The charges were a diary of my son's hedonism. Miami nightclub, $3,000. Luxury car rental, $1,500. Online casino, $500. Online casino, $500. Online casino, $2,000. Page after page of gambling debts and liquor. And then I saw the dates. October 12th, my birthday. I remembered that day. Bradley had come over for dinner. He had brought a cheap bottle of wine and told me he was broke, that he couldn't afford a gift. He had eaten my food, hugged me, and then gone home to gamble away $2,000 of my money. I felt a physical pain in my chest, a sharp stabbing sensation of betrayal that was far worse than the financial loss. He hadn't just stolen my money. He had stolen my trust. He had looked me in the eye and lied over and over again. And Tiffany. I saw charges at high-end boutiques, Sephora, Gucci, Louis Vuitton. The fake bag he had been dragging today wasn't fake because he couldn't afford the real one. It was fake because he had spent the money on something else. Or maybe he had bought a real one for her and sold it, just like he sold my wife's purse. But the credit cards were just the surface wounds. The fatal blow was further down the page. Mortgage inquiry. Sunshine State Lenders. I froze. I owned my house outright. I had paid off the 30-year mortgage 5 years early. I had framed the letter from the bank. I clicked on the details. A home equity line of credit had been taken out 18 months ago. The principal amount was $300,000. The status: delinquent. 90 days past due. My hands flew to the pile of mail I had shoved into the bottom drawer of my desk weeks ago. Bradley had always insisted on getting the mail. "I'll bring it in, Dad. Save you the trip to the box," he would say. He had been filtering it. He had been hiding the statements. I dug through the drawer, tossing aside flyers and magazines until I found it. A thick envelope from a bank I didn't bank with. It had been opened and resealed with tape, clumsily. I tore it open. Inside was a letter dated 3 days ago. The header was in bold, red font. Notice of default and intent to foreclose. I read the words, but my brain refused to process them at first. Dear Mr. Bennett, this letter serves as formal notice that your loan is in default. You have failed to make the required payments for 3 consecutive months. The total amount due to bring the loan current is $24,000. And then, the sentence that stopped my heart. If payment is not received in full by the end of this month, foreclosure proceedings will commence immediately. You will be required to vacate the premises within 30 days of the sale. I looked at the calendar on my computer. It was the 28th. I had 2 days. 2 days before the house I built with Catherine, the house where we raised our son, the house where she took her last breath, would be seized by a bank to pay for Bradley's gambling addiction. I dropped the letter on the desk. It landed on top of the credit report, covering the list of his sins. He didn't just want to go on a cruise. He was running away. He knew this was coming. He knew the house of cards was about to fall. That was why he needed the money from the purse. Not for tips. He needed cash to survive while I was thrown out onto the street. He planned to come back when the dust settled, probably acting surprised, blaming my dementia for forgetting to pay the bills. He would put me in a state-run nursing home, the cheapest one he could find, and he would walk away. I sat there in the silence, the hum of the computer fan the only sound in the room. I looked at the 2 screens. On the left, $10 million. Freedom, power, a new life. On the right, bankruptcy, homelessness, betrayal. A cold, hard clarity settled over me. It was a feeling I hadn't felt since my days on the construction site, when a storm was rolling in and we had to secure the crane. It was the calm before the action. Bradley thought he had buried me. He thought he had trapped me in a collapsing building. But he forgot one thing. I was a structural engineer. I knew how to demolition a building, and I knew exactly where to place the charges to bring the whole thing down on top of him. I reached for the phone again. The lawyer could wait until morning. First, I had some banking to do, and then I had a house to sell. If the bank wanted my house, they couldn't have it, because by the time Bradley stepped off that ship, there wouldn't be a house left to inherit. I looked at the foreclosure notice one last time. 30 days? No. I would be done in 3. I placed the foreclosure notice on the desk, right next to the millions of dollars glowing on the screen. A strange calm washed over me. It was the kind of silence that falls over a construction site right before the demolition charges are detonated. For 3 years, I had been grieving. For 3 years, I had been soft, pliable, and afraid of being alone. I had let my love for my son become a weakness that he exploited with surgical precision. But as I looked at the red ink on that paper, I felt something inside me snap. It wasn't a break. It was a realignment. The grief didn't leave. It just hardened into something cold and sharp, like steel tempered in ice. I pushed the chair back and stood up. The pain in my hip was still there, a dull throb, but I ignored it. I walked out of the office and down the hall to the master bathroom. I turned on the overhead lights, wincing as the harsh brightness illuminated the old man in the mirror. I looked at him. I looked at the gray stubble on his chin, the fear in his eyes, the slumped shoulders of a man who had been apologizing for existing. I hated him. I reached for the faucet and splashed cold water on my face. I scrubbed my skin hard. I wasn't just washing away the sweat of a terrible day. I was washing away the victim. I was washing away the father who forgave everything. I grabbed my razor, the heavy steel safety razor that Catherine had bought me for our 25th anniversary. I lathered my face and began to shave. The sound of the blade scraping against my skin was rhythmic, hypnotic. With every stroke, I felt lighter. I was carving out a new face, a face that wouldn't smile when my son lied to me, a face that wouldn't blink when I destroyed his world. When I was finished, I patted my face dry and walked into the walk-in closet. It was divided down the middle. Catherine's side was empty, save for a few dresses I couldn't bear to pack away. My side was filled with the casual clothes of a retiree: polos, khakis, soft sweaters, the uniform of a man waiting to die. I pushed them aside. I reached all the way to the back, to the garment bag that hadn't been touched since my retirement party. I unzipped it. Inside was my charcoal gray Brooks Brothers suit. It was the suit I wore when I negotiated the contract for the Millennium Tower. It was the suit I wore when I stared down union bosses and city inspectors. It was my armor. I took it out. It smelled faintly of cedar and old ambition. I put it on. The trousers were a little loose around the waist. I had lost weight since Catherine died, but the jacket still fit across the shoulders. I buttoned a crisp white shirt all the way to the top. I tied my tie, a Windsor knot, perfect and tight. I slipped on my dress shoes, ignoring the stiffness in my feet. I looked in the full-length mirror again. The old man was gone. Thomas Bennett, the shark of Chicago construction, stared back. I wasn't a father anymore. I was a CEO handling a hostile takeover, and the hostile element was living in my guest room. I walked back to the office. It was 2:15 in the morning. Most people would wait until business hours to make a call, but I wasn't calling a business. I was calling family, not by blood, but by loyalty. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang 4 times. "Yeah," a groggy voice answered. "This better be good, or someone better be dead." Robert Henderson. We had gone to law school together. Though I dropped out to study engineering, he stayed, and he became the nastiest divorce attorney and estate planner in Miami. He was the only man I trusted to bury a body, metaphorically speaking. "Wake up, Bob," I said. My voice was steady, devoid of the tremor that had plagued me all day. There was a pause on the other end, then the rustling of sheets. "Thomas," Bob asked, his voice clearing instantly. "You sound different. What is wrong?" "Everything is wrong," I said, "and everything is about to be right. I need you to open a file." "At 2 in the morning?" Bob asked. "Yes. I am invoking the nuclear option on Bradley." Bob let out a low whistle. "Finally. I have been waiting 5 years for this call. What did the little bastard do this time?" "He stole Catherine's purse," I said, keeping it brief. "And I found out he took out a $300,000 lien on my house. It is in foreclosure, Bob." He forged my signature. There was a silence on the line. I knew Bob was sitting up now, reaching for his notepad. "I can stop the foreclosure," Bob said, his lawyer brain kicking into high gear. "We can file an affidavit of forgery. We can tie this up in court for years. We can save the house, Thomas." "No," I said. Bob paused. "What do you mean, no?" "It is your house, and you built that deck yourself." "I don't want it," I said, looking around the room. I realized in that moment that I truly didn't. This house was a crime scene. It was where Bradley had learned to lie to me. It was where he had slowly poisoned my life. If I saved the house, Bradley would still have a psychological safety net. He would think he could always come back here, cry, and weave his way back in. I needed to burn the ships. "I want to sell it, Bob. Today." "Thomas, you can't sell a house in foreclosure in a day," Bob argued. "The market is slow. You need inspections, appraisals, listings." "I don't want a realtor," I said. "I want a butcher. You know those signs on the telephone poles? The ones that say, 'We buy ugly houses for cash.' The flippers. The sharks who prey on desperate people. I want you to find me the biggest cash buyer in Miami. I want them here at 8 a.m. I will sell this house for 60 cents on the dollar if I have to. I want the cash to pay off the mortgage so my credit is clear. And I want the locks changed by noon." "You are serious," Bob whispered. "You are going to make yourself homeless to spite him." "I have resources, Bob," I said, looking at the USB drive. "I have resources you can't imagine. I won't be homeless. But when Bradley gets off that boat, I want him to take a taxi to a house that doesn't belong to us anymore. I want him to put his key in the lock and realize he doesn't exist." Bob was silent for a moment. Then I heard the scratch of a pen on paper. "I know a guy," Bob said. "He runs a heavy cash operation. He buys distressed properties, guts them, and flips them. He will be there at 8. "But Thomas, what about your things? What about Bradley's things?" "My things fit in a suitcase," I said. "As for Bradley's things..." I looked at the hallway leading to his room. The room filled with his expensive sneakers, his gaming consoles, his participation trophies. "Make sure the contract says the house is sold as is, with all abandoned contents included," I said. "Or better yet, tell the buyer he can put everything left inside out on the curb." Bob chuckled. It was a dry, dark sound. "You are cold, Thomas. I like it." "Draft the papers, Bob," I said, "and prepare a restraining order. I want it served the minute his foot touches American soil." I hung up the phone. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel sadness. I felt efficient. I spent the rest of the night working. I didn't sleep. I packed 2 suitcases. I took Catherine's photo albums, her jewelry box, and the crocodile purse. I took my important documents. I packed the clothes that fit my new life. Then, I went into Bradley's room. I stood in the doorway. It smelled like stale body spray and entitlement. I looked at the shelves lined with things I had bought him. The 60-inch television, the limited edition action figures. I didn't touch a thing. I wasn't going to pack for him. I wasn't going to save his treasures. If he wanted to treat me like I was disposable, I would treat his entire existence as trash. I walked back to the kitchen and made a pot of coffee. I sat at the island, wearing my suit, watching the sun come up over the swimming pool that Bradley used to throw parties in while I was asleep. At 7:45, a black Hummer pulled into the driveway. A man in a flashy polo shirt jumped out, holding a clipboard. He looked predatory. He looked like exactly the kind of person who would rip off an old man. Perfect. I opened the front door before he could knock. He stopped, surprised to see a man in a tailored suit standing there instead of a weeping senior citizen. "Mr. Bennett," he asked, looking me up and down, "I heard you have a distressed property." I stepped aside and gestured to the foyer. "The property is distressed," I said, my voice cutting through the humid morning air. "But I am not. You have cash. I have a deed. Do you want to make a deal, or should I call the next number on my list?" The man smiled. It was a shark's smile, but he didn't know he was swimming with a megalodon. "Come in," I said. "Let's finish this." The heavy oak door had just clicked shut behind the cash buyer when my phone began to buzz in my pocket. It was a jarring, rhythmic vibration against my thigh. I pulled it out and saw the caller ID flashing on the screen. It was Bradley. The FaceTime icon was pulsing, demanding my attention. I took a deep breath, smoothing down the front of my suit jacket. I needed to shift gears. I needed to put away the shark who had just ruthlessly negotiated the sale of his own home and bring back the trembling, confused old man my son expected to see. I walked over to the window, turning my back to the empty boxes I had started to pile up. I hit the green button and held the phone up, making sure my hand shook just a little. The screen filled with blinding blue sky and the pristine white railing of a cruise ship balcony. Then, Bradley's face appeared. He was wearing oversized sunglasses and a white linen shirt unbuttoned halfway down his chest. He looked like a caricature of wealth, a man without a care in the world. Behind him, Tiffany was lounging on a deck chair, holding a flute of champagne, her new oversized sun hat flapping in the ocean breeze. "Hey, Dad," Bradley shouted over the sound of the wind. "Can you hear me? The connection out here is spotty." "I hear you, son," I said, making my voice sound thin and distant. "It looks very bright there." It is paradise, Dad, he said, flashing a grin that showed too many teeth. You should see the buffet. They have crab legs the size of your arm. He took a sip of a brightly colored cocktail, the ice clinking against the glass. It was a sound of pure indulgence. I am glad you are having fun, I said, forcing a weak smile. I was just looking for my reading glasses. I can't seem to find them anywhere. Bradley rolled his eyes behind his sunglasses. I could feel his impatience radiating through the digital connection. He didn't call to talk about my glasses or the weather. Yeah, well, keep looking, he said dismissively. Look, Dad, I need you to do me a favor. A little emergency came up. My heart didn't even skip a beat. I knew this was coming. It was the rhythm of our relationship. He played, and I paid. What is it, Bradley? I asked. Is everything okay? Oh, everything is fine, he said quickly, waving his hand. It is just, well, we went to the duty-free shops on board, and Tiffany saw this bag. A Chanel. It was limited edition, Dad. The last one on the ship. I couldn't let her walk away from it. She has been so stressed lately, taking care of you and the house. She deserves a treat, right? I looked at Tiffany on the screen. She didn't look stressed. She looked like a predator digesting a meal. She waved at the camera, a lazy, dismissive motion of her hand. The sunlight glinting off a diamond bracelet I suspected was also bought with my credit. Anyway, Bradley continued, his voice taking on that wheedling tone I despised. I tried to use the card you gave me, the emergency one, but it got declined. Probably just a security glitch because we are in international waters. I need you to transfer $5,000 to my checking account. Like right now. We have a dinner reservation at the captain's table tonight, and I want to order the vintage wine. $5,000 for a bag and wine. He asked for it as if he were asking for a glass of water. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. I needed to buy time. I needed them to stay on that ship, spending money they didn't have, digging the hole deeper until it was impossible to climb out. Okay, I said, feigning panic. Don't be angry, son. I will go to the bank. I don't trust doing it on the computer. I always forget the passwords. Bradley sighed, a long, exaggerated exhalation of frustration. You and your dinosaur ways. Fine. Just go to the branch. But hurry up. I will, I promised. I just need to find my keys. I put them down somewhere. You know how my memory is lately. Yeah, I know, Bradley muttered. It is getting worse. Maybe Tiffany is right about that home. Anyway, call me when the transfer is done. Love you, Dad. The I love you was automatic, hollow, and meaningless. It was the punctuation mark on a ransom note. Love you too, son, I said. The screen went black. I lowered the phone. The trembling in my hand stopped instantly. The confusion vanished from my face, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I walked over to my desk, where my laptop was still open. I didn't go to the bank. I sat down in my leather chair and woke up the screen. Bradley wanted a transfer. I would give him a transfer. I was going to transfer him from the world of the privileged to the world of the hunted. I opened the browser window I had prepared earlier. It was the official portal for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, specifically the Internet Crime Complaint Center. Next to it, I had the tabs for Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion open. I started with the credit bureaus. I logged in using my own credentials. I navigated to the fraud alert section. Reason for alert: identity theft. Perpetrator: known family member. I typed in the details with the precision of a surgeon. I listed every credit card Bradley had opened. I listed the home equity line of credit. I flagged the transactions as unauthorized. Freeze credit report. I clicked the button. A padlock icon appeared on the screen. Click. Equifax frozen. Click. Experian frozen. Click. TransUnion frozen. In the span of 30 seconds, I had completely severed Bradley's ability to borrow a single dime in my name. But I wasn't done. That was just defense. Now it was time for the offense. I went to the bank's website, not to transfer money, but to the security center. I selected the credit cards that Bradley had in his wallet, the authorized user cards I had foolishly given him years ago for emergencies. Status: lost/stolen. Action: deactivate immediately. I confirmed the action. Somewhere out in the Caribbean, a magnetic strip just became a useless piece of plastic. The next time he tried to swipe that card for a $1,000 handbag, the machine would scream at him. Finally, I turned to the FBI portal. This was the heavy artillery. I began to fill out the affidavit for identity theft and elder financial abuse. Victim name: Thomas Bennett. Suspect name: Bradley Bennett. Description of crime: suspect forged victim's signature to obtain a $300,000 mortgage lien. Suspect fraudulently opened multiple lines of credit. Suspect liquidated personal property without consent. I uploaded the scanned copies of the forgery documents the lawyer had sent me. I uploaded the credit report showing the dates. I uploaded the photo of the empty display case where Catherine's purse used to be. My finger hovered over the submit button. I thought about Bradley on that deck chair. I thought about him telling me to sell my tools. I thought about him stepping over me in the hallway. I didn't hesitate. I pressed submit. A confirmation number appeared on the screen. Your complaint has been received. A case number has been assigned. I leaned back in my chair. The room was silent, but in my head, I could hear the clock ticking. It was a countdown. Bradley was thousands of miles away, floating on a luxury liner, thinking he was a king, but the ground beneath him had just vanished. He was drifting in open water, and the sharks were already circling. He wanted $5,000. Instead, I had just given him a felony record. I stood up and closed the laptop. I had a house to vacate, and for the first time in years, I felt light. The burden of being a father to a monster was finally gone. Now, I was just a man with a plane ticket and a future. I closed my laptop and walked to the front door where the cash buyer was waiting. His name was Miller. He was a man who smelled of cheap cologne and opportunism. He walked through my home with the swagger of someone who knew he was about to steal a fortune. He tapped the walls, checked the floors, and looked at the crown molding with a critical eye. He thought he was the predator in this scenario. He thought he was taking advantage of a desperate old man who was drowning in debt. He had no idea that I was the one using him as a disposal service. I stood in the center of the living room, my arms crossed, watching him calculate his lowball offer. "Mr. Bennett," Miller said, turning to me with a practiced frown. "The house has good bones, I will give you that. But the roof looks old and the pool needs resurfacing, and given the legal situation with the foreclosure notice you showed me, I can't offer you market value. I can give you $350,000. Cash. Close today. It was a robbery. The house was worth $600,000 easily. But I didn't blink. I didn't haggle. I didn't care about the extra money. I had $10 million in digital currency sitting in my pocket. What I needed was speed. "I will take it," I said, my voice flat. Miller looked surprised. He had expected a fight. He blinked, trying to hide his excitement. "Great," he stammered. "I have the contract right here. We can sign, and I will wire the funds to the title company within the hour. But, Mr. Bennett, we usually need 30 days for you to vacate the property." "No," I interrupted. "I am leaving today. My bags are already in the car. But I have one condition attached to this sale, and if you don't agree to it, I will call the next investor on my list." Miller narrowed his eyes. "What condition?" I pointed down the hallway to the west wing of the house, to the room that had been Bradley's sanctuary for 35 years. "That room," I said. "It is full of furniture, electronics, clothes, and boxes. I am not taking any of it, and I don't want it in the house when I leave." Miller shrugged. "That is fine. We usually hire a clean-out crew anyway. We can donate it or sell it later." "No," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You are not listening. I do not want it donated. I do not want it sold. I want it destroyed. I want everything in that room out on the front lawn in the next hour. I want it gone." Miller looked at me like I was insane. He looked at the intensity in my eyes, the set of my jaw. He realized then that this wasn't just a real estate transaction. This was an exorcism. He pulled out his phone. "I have a demo crew 2 blocks away finishing up another job," he said slowly. "I can have them here in 10 minutes. "Do it," I said. 15 minutes later, a large white van pulled up onto the grass, crushing the sprinkler heads Bradley had promised to fix for months. 3 large men jumped out. They weren't movers. They were wreckers. They wore heavy boots and gloves. I led them to Bradley's room. I opened the door and stepped back. The room was a shrine to adolescence extended into adulthood. The walls were lined with shelves of limited edition sneakers in clear plastic boxes. A gaming setup worth $5,000 sat on a custom desk. Racks of designer streetwear filled the closets. It was a museum of my money, transformed into things I didn't understand. "Empty it," I commanded. "Everything goes." The crew didn't ask questions. They went to work with brutal efficiency. One of them grabbed an armful of those precious sneaker boxes. He didn't stack them. He didn't carry them carefully. He threw them. I walked out to the front porch and watched. It was a sight that would have broken my heart a week ago. Seeing the things my son loved being treated like garbage. But now, it felt like justice. The first box landed on the pristine St. Augustine grass with a thud. Then another. Then the noise of shattering plastic as the high-end gaming monitor hit the driveway. The crew worked like a conveyor belt of destruction. Out came the PlayStation. Out came the collection of vintage comic books. Out came the rack of silk shirts and Italian loafers. They formed a growing pile of excess in the middle of the lawn. Miller stood next to me, watching the spectacle. He looked uneasy. "You know, some of that stuff looks expensive," he muttered. "You sure you don't want to sell it on eBay?" I didn't answer him. I was looking at the sky. Dark, bruised clouds were rolling in from the ocean. The air had turned heavy and thick. A Florida summer storm was about to break. Perfect timing. As if on cue, the heavens opened up. It wasn't a drizzle. It was a deluge. A sheet of gray water slammed into the earth. I watched as the rain hit the pile. I saw the cardboard sneaker boxes disintegrate, turning into mush. I saw the expensive leather of the shoes darken and warp. I saw the electronics spark and fizzle as the water seeped into their circuits. The clothes, the designer jeans and silk shirts, were instantly soaked, matting together in a sodden, muddy heap. It was beautiful. All the symbols of Bradley's status, all the things he valued more than his own father, were being washed away. The rain was cleansing the property. It was washing away the lies. The crew finished their job and ran back to the van to escape the downpour. "Is Bradley okay?" I stopped. I turned to look at her. Water dripped from the brim of my nose. I looked at the house that was no longer mine. I looked at the ruins of my son's materialism. I didn't feel the need to explain. I didn't feel the need to lie to protect the family image anymore. The family image was dead. I looked Mrs. Gable right in the eye. "Everything is fine, Martha," I called back, my voice cutting through the sound of the storm. "But his things," she pointed. "Why are you throwing them away?" I opened the door of my truck and tossed my suitcases onto the passenger seat. I climbed in and started the engine. I rolled down the window one last time to look at her. "I am just taking out the trash," I said. I put the truck in gear and pulled away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I left the house, the memories, and the sodden pile of my son's future behind me in the rain. I had a plane to catch, and somewhere in the middle of the ocean, Bradley Bennett was about to find out that his credit card wasn't the only thing that had been declined. His entire life had just been canceled. The rain was still drumming against the windshield of my truck as I pulled into the parking lot of the First National Bank. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My hair was plastered to my forehead, and my suit was dark with water. But I didn't look like a victim. I looked like a man who had walked through a storm and come out the other side. I grabbed my leather briefcase, which contained the hard evidence of my son's betrayal, and marched toward the glass doors. The air inside the bank was cool and smelled of money and floor wax. I didn't wait in the line for the tellers. I walked straight to the glass office in the back, the one with the gold nameplate that read, "Frank Miller, Branch Manager." Frank and I went way back. We had played golf together for 10 years before my hip gave out. He was the one who had helped me set up the college fund for Bradley 20 years ago. It was only fitting that he would be the one to help me dismantle Bradley's future. Frank looked up as I entered, his eyes widening at my soaked appearance. "Thomas," he said, standing up quickly. "Good Lord, what happened to you? Is everything all right?" I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I closed the door behind me and locked it. I sat down in the chair opposite his desk and placed the briefcase on the mahogany surface. "I need you to look at something, Frank," I said, my voice steady and low. "And then I need you to do exactly what I say. No questions asked." I opened the briefcase and slid the documents across the desk. The credit report, the foreclosure notice, the affidavit I had just filed with the FBI, and the letter from the bank regarding the home equity line of credit that I had never signed. Frank put on his reading glasses. I watched his face as he read. First came confusion, then shock, and finally, a deep, uncomfortable shade of red. He looked up at me, taking off his glasses. "Thomas," he whispered, This is a felony. This is forgery. These are Bradley's accounts, but they are linked to your social security number." "I know," I said. "He forged my signature. He stole my identity. He put my house, the house I bought with Catherine, on the auction block." Frank shook his head, looking sick. "I am so sorry, Thomas. I had no idea. He came in here a few months ago, said you were having trouble getting around, that you wanted him to help manage the finances. He had the power of attorney paperwork. It looked legitimate." "It was fake, Frank," I said, cold as ice, just like his love for me was fake. "But we are not here to talk about the past. We are here to stop the bleeding." I leaned forward. "I want a total freeze, Frank. I want every single account with my name on it locked down. I want the joint checking account closed. I want the authorized user credit cards deactivated. I want you to flag his personal accounts for suspicious activity based on the transfer of stolen funds." Frank hesitated. "Thomas, if I do that, if I flag his accounts for fraud, the system automatically notifies the authorities. It triggers a suspicious activity report. It goes to the federal level. He could be arrested the moment he tries to use a bank service." "That is the point," I said. "Do it." Frank looked at me for a long moment. He saw the resolve in my eyes. He nodded slowly and turned to his keyboard. The sound of his typing was the only noise in the room. Click, click, click. Each keystroke was a guillotine blade coming down on my son's lifestyle. I watched the screen as he worked. Visa signature ending in 4598. Status: stolen, deactivated. MasterCard World Elite. Status: fraudulent activity, blocked. Home equity line. Status: frozen pending legal investigation. It took 10 minutes. 10 minutes to undo 5 years of theft. When Frank stopped typing, he looked up. "It is done," he said softly. "Every card he has in his wallet is now a piece of plastic. And Thomas, the system flagged a pending transaction just now. A hold on the platinum card." "Where?" I asked. "Royal Caribbean Cruise Line," Frank read from the screen. "Onboard expenses." "Let it bounce," I said. Frank hit the enter key one last time. Thousands of miles away, in the middle of the shimmering blue ocean, the sun was setting over the deck of the cruise ship. The air was filled with the sound of a steel drum band and the laughter of wealthy vacationers. Bradley was sitting at the best table in the ship's specialty steakhouse. He was wearing a fresh white shirt, though it wasn't the designer one he had packed, since that one was currently rotting in a pile of mud back in Florida. He didn't know that yet. He felt good. He felt rich. Across from him, Tiffany was picking at a massive lobster tail, the butter glistening on her lips. They had ordered the surf and turf tower, the most expensive item on the menu, priced at $200 a person. They had ordered a bottle of Dom Perignon to wash it down. The bill sitting on the table was over $2,000. Bradley leaned back, patting his stomach. "This is the life, babe," he said, raising his glass. "I told you the old man would cough up the cash. He always does. We just have to scare him a little." Tiffany giggled, clinking her glass against his. "You are a genius, Brad. We should book a spa day tomorrow, since we have the extra $5,000 coming." A waiter in a crisp white uniform approached the table. He was holding a leather folder and a portable card machine. "Mr. Bennett," the waiter said politely, "I hope you enjoyed your meal." "It was excellent," Bradley said, not even looking at the man. He pulled out the black platinum card, my platinum card, and tossed it onto the tray with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "Put it on this, and add a 20% tip." "I am feeling generous." The waiter nodded and inserted the card into the machine. Bradley went back to looking at the ocean, humming a tune. The machine beeped, a harsh, dissonant sound. The waiter frowned. He pulled the card out and wiped the chip on his apron. He inserted it again. Beep. Bradley looked up, annoyed. "What is the problem?" "I am sorry, sir," the waiter said, his voice dropping a little. "The card was declined." Bradley laughed. "That is impossible. That is a platinum card. It has a $50,000 limit. Try it again." The waiter tried a third time. The machine flashed a red light. "Sir, the message says, 'Do not honor.' It means the issuer has blocked the account. Do you have another form of payment?" Bradley felt a flush of heat creep up his neck. People at the nearby tables were starting to look. He snatched the card back. "Stupid bank," he muttered. "They probably think it is fraud because I am out of the country. Here." He pulled out the Visa card, the one linked to the joint account. "Try this one." The waiter took it. He inserted it. Beep. Declined. Bradley's smile vanished. His hands started to sweat. He pulled out the MasterCard. "Try this one." Beep. Declined. Contact issuer. The silence at the table was deafening. The steel drum band seemed to stop playing. The other diners were openly staring now. Tiffany had stopped eating. She looked at Bradley with wide, panicked eyes. Brad, she hissed. What is going on? Why aren't the cards working? I don't know, Bradley stammered, his voice rising in pitch. It must be a system error. The ship's satellite must be down. The waiter's polite smile had disappeared. He signaled to the maitre d', a large man who looked more like a bouncer than a host. Sir, the maitre d' said, stepping up to the table, is there a problem with the payment? My cards are not working, Bradley said, standing up. Your machine is broken. I demand to speak to the manager. Our machines are working perfectly fine, sir, the maitre d' said coldly. Every other guest is paying without issue. If you cannot provide a valid form of payment for this $2,000 bill, we will have to escort you to the security office. Security, Bradley squawked. Do you know who I am? My father is Thomas Bennett. He has millions. I don't care who your father is, the maitre d' said, motioning for two security guards who had materialized from the shadows. Right now, you are a guest who has consumed expensive goods without the ability to pay. Bradley looked at Tiffany. Give me your card, he said, desperate. Tiffany clutched her purse. My card is maxed out, Brad. You know that. You said you would pay for everything. The security guards stepped forward. One of them placed a heavy hand on Bradley's shoulder. Sir, please come with us. Quietly. Bradley looked around the dining room. He saw the judgment in the eyes of the other passengers. He saw the waiter shaking his head. For the first time in his life, the safety net was gone. He reached for his phone to call me, to scream at me, to demand I fix this. But as he looked at the screen, he saw a notification from his banking app. Alert. Account closed by bank administration. And below that, an email from the airline. Alert. Return ticket canceled. His knees buckled. He wasn't just broke. He was stranded. And as the guards began to drag him out of the restaurant, kicking and screaming while Tiffany trailed behind sobbing, he realized the vacation was over. The nightmare had just begun. The waiter stood over table 12 like a statue carved from judgment. The declined receipt from the platinum card lay on the white tablecloth like a death sentence. Bradley felt a bead of sweat roll down his spine, soaking into the fabric of the expensive linen shirt he would soon regret wearing. He laughed nervously, a high-pitched sound that fooled absolutely no one. There must be a mistake, Bradley stammered, his hands shaking as he reached for his wallet again. He pulled out the blue Visa card, the one linked to our joint checking account. The account that I had drained and closed 45 minutes ago. Try this one, Bradley said, thrusting the plastic at the waiter. It is my debit card. Direct access to cash. No limits. The waiter took it with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. He slid it into the machine. The silence at the table was heavy, broken only by the clinking of silverware from oblivious diners nearby. Tiffany stopped chewing her lobster. She gripped the stem of her champagne flute so hard, I am surprised it did not shatter in her manicured hand. The machine beeped. A long, flat tone. Declined, the waiter said, his voice dropping an octave. The screen says invalid account number. Sir, this account does not exist. Bradley's face drained of color. That is impossible, he hissed. I just checked the balance this morning. There is $10,000 in there. Run it again. I cannot run it again, sir, the waiter said, stepping back. The card has been flagged. Bradley was digging frantically through his wallet now. He dumped the contents onto the table, scattering receipts and business cards next to the half-eaten seafood tower. He found the MasterCard, the backup credit card I had added him to 5 years ago. Here, he shouted, waving it. This one never fails. It has a 0 balance, just take it. The waiter sighed, a sound of profound exhaustion. He took the card. He inserted it. He waited. Declined, the machine chirped. Pick up card. That was 3. Bradley looked at Tiffany. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of terror and fury. "Give me your wallet," Bradley demanded. Tiffany clutched her Prada clutch against her chest. "No, Brad. My cards are maxed out. You know that." "Give it to me," he yelled, grabbing her bag. He ripped it open and pulled out her gold store card. It was a card for emergencies only, backed by a high-interest line of credit. He threw it at the waiter. "Just run it. I don't care about the interest rate. Just pay the bill." The waiter looked at the manager, who was now standing a few feet away with his arms crossed. The manager nodded. The waiter ran the 4th card. Declined. Insufficient credit history. Bradley sat there, breathing hard. He had 1 card left. A secret card he thought I didn't know about. A gas station credit card hidden in a secret pocket of his wallet. It had a limit of $500. It wouldn't cover the whole bill, but maybe it would be enough to buy them time. He pulled it out. It was his last lifeline. "Run 500 on this," Bradley whispered. "I will go to the room and get cash for the rest." The waiter ran the 5th card. Declined. Account frozen due to suspicious activity. 5 cards. 5 rejections. The digital wall I had built around my son was impenetrable. He sat there, surrounded by luxury he couldn't afford, staring at the pile of useless plastic. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He wasn't just having a banking error. He was being erased. The manager stepped forward. He didn't look like a hospitality professional anymore. He looked like an enforcer. "Sir," the manager said, his voice carrying across the quiet dining room, "you have attempted to pay with 5 different cards. All have been rejected by the issuers. This is no longer a misunderstanding. This is theft of services." "I can pay," Bradley squeaked, his arrogance completely gone. My father is Thomas Bennett. He is rich. Just let me call him." "We are past that," the manager said, cold and hard. "You have consumed over $2,000 of food and alcohol with no means to pay. On this ship, that is a crime." He raised his hand. 2 security officers in white uniforms stepped out from the shadows. They weren't smiling. They carried zip ties on their belts. "Please escort Mr. and Mrs. Bennett to the holding area," the manager ordered, "and confiscate their luggage from their suite. We will need to inventory it for liquidation to cover the debt." "The holding area!" Tiffany shrieked, standing up so fast her chair fell over. "You mean the brig? Like a jail?" "I am not going to jail. I am an influencer." That was the wrong thing to say. At the table next to them, a group of teenagers had been watching the entire meltdown. They had their phones out. The flashlights were on. They were recording every second of it. "Oh my God," one of the girls whispered loud enough for the whole room to hear. "That is the guy who was bragging about his dad's money at the pool. Look at him now. He can't even pay for his shrimp." I can see the captions now. "Fake millionaire busted. Dine and dash on the high seas." Bradley saw the phones. He saw the red recording dots. He tried to hide his face with his hands, but it was too late. The security guards grabbed him by the arms. They didn't use gentle hands. They hauled him up like a sack of garbage. "Don't touch me," Bradley yelled, trying to struggle. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," a woman at a nearby table said, sipping her wine. "You are the guy ruining our dinner. Get him out of here." The dining room erupted in applause. Actual applause. The wealthy passengers, the people Bradley so desperately wanted to impress, were cheering for his removal. The guards dragged them out. They didn't take them through the main atrium. They took them through the service door, past the kitchen where the dishwashers stared at them, down the metal stairs that smelled of diesel and garbage. This was the bowels of the ship. There were no chandeliers here, just fluorescent lights and steel bars. They threw them into a small, windowless room. There was a bunk bed bolted to the wall and a metal toilet in the corner. "Sit tight," the head of security said, locking the heavy door. "The port authorities will meet you when we dock in 3 days. Until then, this is your suite." Bradley sat on the thin mattress, his head in his hands. Tiffany was in the corner, sobbing into her knees, her mascara running down her face in black streaks. "I need to call him," Bradley muttered. He pulled his phone out of his pocket. The security guards hadn't taken it yet. They probably wanted him to try to find money. He dialed my number. I was sitting in the airport lounge in Miami, watching the rain streak against the glass. I had a glass of scotch in one hand and my phone in the other. The screen lit up. "Incoming call. Son." I looked at it. I watched the name pulse on the screen. 1 ring. I took a sip of scotch. The burn was pleasant. 2 rings. I imagined him in that cell. I imagined the smell of the room. I imagined the panic clawing at his throat. 3 rings. He was probably screaming my name right now. "Dad, pick up. Dad, save me. Dad, fix it." 4 rings. He had never called me just to say hello. He had never called to ask how my hip was feeling. He only called when he needed to bleed me dry. 5 rings. I thought about the 5 cards he tried to use. 5 rejections. 5 lessons he refused to learn. 6 rings. I remembered the sound of the glass breaking when he stole the purse. 7 rings. I remembered the foreclosure notice. 8 rings. I remembered Catherine's letter. "Do not let him win." 9 rings. I hovered my thumb over the decline button. 10 rings. I didn't decline it. I didn't give him the satisfaction of knowing I was there and actively ignoring him. I just let it ring until it went to voicemail. I watched the screen go dark. I took another sip of my drink. The boarding announcement for the flight to Rome echoed over the intercom. "Flight 820 to Rome is now boarding. First-class passengers, please approach the gate." I stood up. I picked up my carry-on bag, which contained a crocodile purse and a new future. I left the phone on the table. I didn't need it anymore. The man who used to answer that phone didn't exist. I walked toward the gate, ready to see the world Catherine had wanted for me. And as I handed my boarding pass to the attendant, I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had felt in years. I sat in the high-backed leather chair of the first-class lounge, nursing a glass of sparkling water with a twist of lime. The noise of the terminal outside was just a distant hum, insulated by thick glass and the privilege of a membership I had not used in 5 years. My boarding pass sat on the small marble table next to me. Miami to Rome. One way. No return date. No return address. The phone on the table began to buzz again. It was the 11th time Bradley had called in the last 10 minutes. The screen lit up with his face, a photo taken 2 Christmases ago when he still pretended to be a dutiful son. I picked up the phone. I did not swipe to answer immediately. I looked at it, feeling the weight of the device in my hand. It felt like holding the detonator to a bomb that had already exploded. I took a slow sip of my water, savoring the coolness, and then, with a calm thumb, I slid the bar to green. "Hello, Bradley," I said. My voice was steady, quiet, and devoid of the trembling frailty I had feigned for months. "Dad!" Bradley screamed. The sound was distorted, cracking with panic and poor reception. "Dad, thank God. You have to help me. It is a nightmare. They locked us up. They put us in a cell, Dad. A cell. They took my phone, but I hid it in my sock. You have to transfer the money. You have to call the bank. They are saying the cards are stolen." I listened to him hyperventilate. I could hear the hum of the ship's engine in the background, a low mechanical drone that sounded like a prison industrial complex. Slow down, son, I said, leaning back in my chair. You sound upset. Upset, he shrieked. I am not upset. I am being detained. They treated me like a criminal in front of the whole dining room. Tiffany is having a panic attack. Fix this, Dad. Call the credit card company and tell them it is a mistake. Tell them you authorized the charges. Do it now. I looked out the window at the tarmac, where a massive Boeing 777 was being refueled. It was a beautiful machine, engineered for distance, engineered to leave things behind. I cannot do that, Bradley, I said softly. What do you mean you can't? He yelled. Just pick up the phone and tell them. I mean I can't, because it is not a mistake, I said. I authorized the freeze. I reported the cards as compromised, and I reported the identity theft regarding the house. There was a silence on the other end of the line. It was a thick, heavy silence. The kind of silence that happens when a man realizes the ground he is standing on is actually a trapdoor. What? Bradley whispered. What did you say? I took a breath. This was it, the moment Catherine had prepared me for. I said, I know, Bradley. I know about the second mortgage. I know about the $300,000 you stole from the equity of my home. I know about the credit cards you opened in my name in 2018. I know everything. Dad, wait, Bradley stammered, his voice jumping an octave. I can explain. It was an investment. I was going to pay you back. I was doing it for us. Stop, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through his lies like a diamond cutter. Just stop lying. It is over. But before I go, I want to tell you something. I want to tell you a story about a purse. A purse, Bradley asked, confused. What are you talking about? The crocodile purse, I said. The one you stole from your mother's room. The one you sold to Sal for $400 because you needed tip money. Yeah, so what? He snapped. It was old junk. I closed my eyes for a second, picturing the USB drive now safely tucked in my jacket pocket. That old junk had a false bottom, Bradley. Your mother was smarter than you. She was smarter than both of us. She hid something in that lining years ago. What? Bradley asked. The arrogance was creeping back into his voice. What? Some old cash. A few $1,000. Is that why you are mad? No, I said. Not cash. She bought Bitcoin, Bradley. She bought 150 Bitcoin back in 2015. She left the private key in that purse. I waited. I wanted him to do the math. I wanted him to feel the number hit him. Bitcoin, he repeated. 150. I heard the sound of his breath hitching. I knew he was frantic, trying to calculate the value in his head. That is millions, he whispered. $10 million, I corrected him. $10,200,000 as of this morning's market open. I heard a sound that was half gasp, half sob. You have $10 million, Bradley cried. Oh my God. Dad, listen. This is great. We are rich. You can pay the bill on the ship. You can get us a helicopter. We can fix the house. We can start over. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. We are not doing anything, Bradley. I already used the money. What? He asked. I used a small fraction of it to pay off the debts you forged in my name, I said. I cleared my credit report. And then, I sold the house. You sold the house, he screamed. But where am I going to live? I don't know, I said. That is not my problem anymore. I sold the house to a cash buyer this morning. He is gutting it right now. Your room is gone. Your sneakers are gone. Your video games are sitting in a pile of mud on the front lawn. It is all gone, Bradley. No, 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 he was chanting now, panic taking over completely. Dad, you can't do this. I am your son. You were my son, I said. Now you are just a defendant. Defendant? He asked, his voice trembling. I already spoke to the FBI, Bradley. I filed the affidavit this morning. Identity theft, elder abuse, wire fraud. The evidence is impeccable. I sent them the bank records, the forged signatures, everything. I paused to let the reality sink in. When that ship docks in Port Canaveral in 3 days, there will be a welcoming committee waiting for you. But it won't be me. It will be the federal police. You are looking at 10 to 15 years, son. Enjoy the cruise. It is the last vacation you will take for a very long time. Dad, please. He was sobbing now, open, ugly sobs. Don't do this. I am sorry. I will change. You had 35 years to change, I said. Suddenly, there was a scuffling sound on the phone, a screeching noise. Tiffany had been listening. Give me the phone, she screamed. I heard them fighting for the device. Then Tiffany's voice pierced my ear. It was shrill, venomous, and terrified. Thomas, you listen to me, she yelled. You old bat, you cannot leave us here. You have $10 million. You owe us. I put up with your son for 5 years. I deserve a cut. You send that money right now, or I will. Or you will what, Tiffany? I asked calmly. You have no leverage. You have no money. And from what I can hear, you are about to be single. You did this, she screamed. You ruined everything. No, I said. You two ruined yourselves. I just turned on the lights. I heard Bradley in the background begging her. Tiff, baby, don't talk to him like that. He is going to save us. Save us, she shrieked at him. He just sold the house, you idiot. He called the cops. You are going to prison. I am not going to prison for you. I told you this would happen. I told you he wasn't as stupid as he looked. I listened to them turn on each other. It was the inevitable end of a relationship built on greed. Without the money to bind them, they were just two rats in a cage, fighting for survival. Bradley, I said, raising my voice slightly to be heard over the chaos. The fighting stopped for a second. Yeah, Dad, Bradley panted. Dad, help me. I am going to hang up now, I said. My flight is boarding. I am going to Rome. I am going to buy a villa. I am going to drink wine and look at the sunset. And I am never going to think about you again. Dad. No. Dad. Goodbye, Bradley. I pressed the red button. The connection severed. The screaming stopped. The silence returned. I sat there for a moment, looking at the black screen of the phone. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. I thought it would be heavy, like guilt, but it wasn't. It was relief. It was the feeling of setting down a burden I had carried for far too long. I stood up. I picked up my bag. I walked to the trash can near the entrance of the lounge. I looked at the phone one last time. It was the only way they could reach me. I dropped the phone into the bin. I adjusted my jacket, straightened my tie, and walked out the automatic doors toward the gate. The announcement system chimed. Final boarding call for Rome. I smiled. I was finally going home. 3 days had passed since I dropped my phone into the trash can at the airport terminal. While I was settling into a rented villa overlooking the vineyards of Tuscany, sipping a glass of Brunello and breathing in air that smelled of cypress and freedom, my son was experiencing a very different kind of arrival. The luxury liner he had boarded with such arrogance was now docking at Port Canaveral. But Bradley Bennett was not disembarking with the rest of the tanned and happy tourists. He was not waiting for his luggage in the VIP lounge. The sun was beating down on the concrete pier, the humid Florida heat rising in shimmering waves. Down the metal gangway came a procession of joy. Families holding hands, children clutching stuffed animals, couples wearing matching straw hats. And then the flow of passengers was halted by the ship's security team. A hush fell over the crowd waiting at the terminal. Two figures were being escorted down the ramp, flanked by four large officers in white uniforms. It was Bradley and Tiffany. They were unrecognizable from the polished, sneering couple that had left my driveway less than a week ago. Bradley was wearing the same linen shirt he had worn to dinner 3 nights prior. It was stained with sweat and wrinkled beyond recognition. His face was covered in patchy stubble, his eyes bloodshot and darting frantically from side to side. He wasn't wearing his sunglasses anymore because they had been confiscated. He looked small. He looked exposed. Tiffany trudged behind him. Her hair, usually a perfectly sculpted helmet of blonde extensions, was matted and tied back with a rubber band. She had cried off all her makeup, leaving her face pale and puffy. She wasn't yelling anymore. She was just staring at her feet, dragging her feet in her expensive sandals that were never meant for a walk of shame. They reached the bottom of the ramp. Bradley blinked in the harsh sunlight, looking around wildly. For a fleeting second, he probably hoped to see my old Ford truck waiting in the parking lot. He probably hoped that this was all just a terrifying lesson and that his father had come to bail him out. He probably thought he could cry, apologize, and go back to his comfortable bedroom with his video games and his delusions. But I wasn't there. Instead, waiting at the bottom of the gangway were 4 officers from the Brevard County Sheriff's Office and 2 agents in suits who looked very much like federal investigators. They stood with their arms crossed, their sunglasses reflecting the pathetic image of my son stumbling toward them. Ship security handed them over like unwanted cargo. The lead officer, a man with a thick neck and zero patience, stepped forward. He didn't offer a greeting. He reached for his belt and unclipped a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. "Bradley Bennett," the officer boomed, his voice carrying over the noise of the port. Bradley flinched. "Yes, that is me. Look, officer, this is all a huge misunderstanding. The cruise line made a mistake with my credit cards. My father will clear this up, if you just let me call him." The officer didn't listen. He spun Bradley around and slammed him against the side of the police cruiser. He kicked Bradley's legs apart. "Bradley Bennett, you are under arrest," the officer recited, the words mechanical and cold. "Arrest!" Bradley shrieked, his face pressed against the hot metal of the car. "For what?" "I didn't do anything, I just couldn't pay a bill. That is a civil matter." "It is not a civil matter when you use a stolen identity," the officer said, clicking the cuffs onto Bradley's wrists. The metal ratcheted tight, biting into the skin. "You are being charged with 3 counts of identity theft, 5 counts of wire fraud, and 1 count of aggravated exploitation of an elderly person or disabled adult. In the state of Florida, financial abuse of the elderly involving sums over $50,000 is a first-degree felony." A first-degree felony. The words hung in the thick air. Bradley stopped struggling. His body went limp against the car. He knew the law enough to know what that meant. Mandatory minimums. Decades, not years. Tiffany tried to back away, her eyes wide with terror. She pointed a shaking finger at her husband. "I didn't do it," she stammered, her voice high and thin. "It was him. He told me the money was his. He told me his dad gave it to him. I am just the wife. I didn't sign anything." The second officer stepped forward and grabbed Tiffany's wrist. "Tiffany Bennett, you are also under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and aiding and abetting. We have the logs of the purchases made on your personal devices using the stolen funds. You enjoyed the fruit of the poisonous tree, ma'am. You are going for the ride too." "No!" she screamed as the cuffs snapped onto her wrists. "This isn't fair. I have rights. You have the right to remain silent," the officer said, pushing her toward the second patrol car. "And I suggest you use it." As they were being shoved into the back of the cruisers, Bradley looked up. He saw a figure standing near the barricade, watching the scene unfold with a briefcase in hand. It was a man in a gray suit, looking calm and professional amidst the chaos. Bradley's face lit up with desperate hope. He recognized him. It was Robert Henderson. "My lawyer. My friend." "Bob!" Bradley yelled, struggling against the officer's grip. "Bob, over here. Thank God. Dad sent you. I knew he wouldn't leave me. Tell them, Bob. Tell them this is a mistake. Get me out of here." Henderson walked over slowly. He didn't look rushed. He stopped a few feet away from the open door of the police car where Bradley was sitting, sweating and frantic. Henderson looked down at my son, not with pity but with the cold detachment of a man executing a will. "Mr. Henderson, please," Bradley begged, tears streaming down his face mixed with snot. "You have to represent me. You have to fix this. Where is Dad? Is he in the car?" Henderson reached into his briefcase. He didn't pull out a bail bond. He didn't pull out a defense strategy. He pulled out a single folded document with a court seal on the top. "Your father is not here, Bradley," Henderson said, his voice level. "And he is not coming. He is currently out of the country and cannot be reached." "But he sent you," Bradley insisted. "He sent you to help me." "He sent me to deliver this," Henderson said. He handed the paper to the officer, who held it up for Bradley to see. "This is a permanent restraining order, Bradley. It forbids you from coming within 500 feet of Thomas Bennett, his properties, or his associates. It also forbids you from contacting him by phone, email, or third party." Bradley stared at the paper. The reality finally crashed down on him. The safety net wasn't just gone. The trapeze artist had left the building. He is not helping me," Bradley whispered, his voice cracking. "No," Henderson said. "He is testifying against you. I have already handed over the full evidence file to the district attorney. The bank records, the forged mortgage documents, the camera footage from the pawn shop. It is all there, Bradley. Your father was very thorough." "But why?" Bradley sobbed. "Why would he do this to his own son?" Henderson leaned in slightly, looking Bradley right in the eye. "Because you sold his wife's memory for $400, Henderson said, "and because you mistook his kindness for weakness. He wanted me to give you a message, Bradley." "What?" Bradley asked, looking like a drowning man. Henderson straightened up, adjusting his tie. He said he hopes the cruise was worth it. Henderson nodded to the officer. The officer slammed the car door shut. The sound was final. It was the sound of a coffin closing. Bradley pressed his face against the glass, screaming something that no one could hear. Tiffany was in the car behind him, weeping into her hands. The convoy of police cars turned on their lights, flashing red and blue against the bright Florida sky. They pulled away from the curb, merging into the traffic, heading toward the county jail. I wasn't there to see it, but Henderson told me later that the silence after they left was peaceful. The tourists went back to their vacations. The seagulls went back to circling the water. The world kept turning, and thousands of miles away, I poured another glass of wine and watched the sun dip below the Tuscan hills. The nightmare was over. The leech had been removed, and for the first time in 35 years, the air around me was completely, wonderfully clean. I took a sip, closed my eyes, and finally, truly, rested. The morning sun in Tuscany hits the terracotta tiles of my patio differently than the sun in Florida. In Florida, the heat was oppressive, a heavy blanket that made you sweat just by standing still. Here, the warmth is gentle. It smells of rosemary growing wild in the garden and the rich, dark espresso sitting on the small iron table in front of me. I took a sip, letting the bitterness wake up my tongue. It has been 6 months. 6 months since I walked out of an airport terminal and into a life I had only ever seen in magazines or Catherine's scrapbooks. I looked out over the rolling hills, covered in the neat, orderly rows of vineyards that stretched as far as the eye could see. I wasn't an engineer anymore. I wasn't building skyscrapers or worrying about load-bearing walls. My biggest concern today was whether to walk to the village for fresh bread or to drive the vintage Alfa Romeo I had bought last week to the coast. It was a difficult choice, the kind of problem Catherine would have loved to solve. I reached into the pocket of my linen jacket. It was a habit I still hadn't broken, checking for a phone that wasn't there. I didn't carry a cell phone anymore. I had a landline in the villa for emergencies, but that was it. If someone wanted to reach me, they had to write a letter. And they did. On the table next to my coffee cup sat an envelope. The paper was cheap and rough, the kind used by government institutions. The stamp in the corner was red ink. Florida Department of Corrections. I stared at it. I didn't need to open it to know what was inside. It was either a plea for forgiveness or a demand for money for the commissary. Bradley had been sentenced 4 months ago. 12 years. Tiffany got 5. The trial had been swift. The evidence I provided was so overwhelming that their public defender had advised them to plead guilty immediately to avoid the maximum penalty. I didn't go to the hearing. I didn't send a statement. I just let the justice system do the work I should have done as a father years ago. I picked up the envelope. It felt light. There was probably just a single sheet of paper inside. I ran my thumb over the return address. Inmate number 89,402. He didn't even have a name anymore. He was just a number in a database, much like the credit score he had tried to ruin. For a moment, a ghost of the old Thomas flickered in my chest. The Thomas who would have ripped this open, looking for a sign of remorse, looking for a reason to send a check. The Thomas who thought that love meant enduring abuse. But then I looked at my hands. They were tanned. The tremors were gone. The ring finger on my left hand still wore my wedding band, but I had moved it to my right hand. Catherine was still with me, but she wasn't holding me back. She was pushing me forward. I reached for the silver lighter on the table. I picked up a cigar, a Cuban cohiba that I had been saving. I cut the tip slowly, enjoying the ritual. I lit the cigar, puffing until the end glowed a bright, angry orange. I took a long draw, letting the smoke fill my mouth, tasting the earth and the spice. Then I held the flame to the corner of the envelope. The paper caught instantly. The fire curled the edges, turning the white paper into black ash. I watched the flames eat the return address. I watched them consume the inmate number. I held it until the heat licked at my fingertips, until there was nothing left but a charred flake drifting down onto the stone patio. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel happy. I felt clean. It was the final demolition. The site was cleared. Buongiorno, Thomas. I looked up. Walking up the gravel path was Marco, my neighbor. He was a retired vineyard owner, a man of 75 with a laugh that could shake the olives off the trees. He was carrying a basket of figs from his garden. "Good morning, Marco," I said, standing up to greet him. "I brought you some breakfast," Marco said, setting the basket down. "These are the last of the season. They are sweet like honey." "Thank you, my friend," I said. "Please sit. Have some coffee." Marco sat down, his eyes twinkling. He looked at the pile of ash on the table, then at the cigar in my hand. "Bad news?" Marco asked, gesturing to the remains of the letter. "No," I said, smiling. "Old news, just clearing out the clutter." Marco nodded wisely. He didn't ask questions. That was the beauty of my new friends here. They didn't care about my past. They didn't care about my money. They liked me because I played a terrible game of chess and told good stories about building tall towers in the Windy City. "You look different today, Thomas," Marco said, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "You look lighter." "I feel lighter," I admitted. "I spent a long time carrying a heavy load, Marco. I thought it was my duty. I thought that if I put it down, I would be a bad man." "And now," Marco asked. "Now I know that the load wasn't mine to carry," I said. I looked at the hills again. The mist was lifting, revealing the vibrant green of the valley. "You know, Marco," I said thoughtfully, "we spend so much of our lives building foundations for other people. We build houses for our children. We build safety nets for our spouses. We build legacies. But sometimes, we forget to build a door for ourselves, a door we can walk through when the house becomes a prison." Marco broke open a fig and handed me half. "It is never too late to build a new door, Thomas, or to buy a villa with a nice view." I laughed, taking the fruit. It tasted of sunshine and earth. "You are right," I said. "I think Catherine would have liked this place. She always wanted to learn Italian." "She is here," Marco said, tapping his chest. "She is enjoying the view too." I leaned back in my chair, the smoke from my cigar rising into the blue sky. I thought about Bradley sitting in his cell. I hoped he was learning something. I hoped that in the silence of his confinement, he would finally find the character he had never been able to buy. But if he didn't, it wouldn't change the taste of this fig. It wouldn't change the warmth of this sun. I looked at Marco, raising my coffee cup in a toast. "To new foundations," I said. "To new foundations," Marco agreed, clinking his cup against mine. I took a sip and smiled. It wasn't the polite smile of a father trying to keep the peace. It was the smile of a man who had survived the storm. "Life truly begins," I said softly, more to myself than to Marco, "when we stop sacrificing ourselves for those who are unworthy, even if they share our blood. We cannot save people who are determined to drown, Marco. We can only save ourselves and swim to the shore." "And the shore is beautiful," Marco said, gesturing to the valley. "Yes," I said, watching a hawk circle high above the vineyard, free and untethered. "It is beautiful." The screen fades to black as the smoke from the cigar drifts upward, disappearing into the endless Italian sky. The biggest lesson I learned from this journey is that enabling is not love. For years, I thought I was protecting my son by fixing his mistakes and shielding him from consequences. I thought I was being a good father, but in reality, I was robbing him of the chance to grow up, and I was robbing myself of my own dignity. We often hold on to toxic family members because we are afraid of the guilt of letting go. But protecting your peace is not a betrayal. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to step back and let people face their own reality. If you enjoyed this story and believe that everyone deserves a second chance at happiness, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that it is okay to choose yourself. And tell me in the comments, what is one thing you have always wanted to do but put off for others? Let's dream together. See you in the next story.